Hi folks, welcome to another one of my prepping videos. I apologize for the noise. I have to have my air conditioner and my generator running, so please just bear with me on that. These are my normal disclaimers. Okay, this video is going to be about survival food and gardening. There are lots of prepping videos out there that talk to you about storing survival food, canned food, your survival emergency kits and things like that. My way of doing it is a little bit different because I have learned that survival food and food storage and gardening go hand in hand. Your survival garden seeds are your food. There's a crossover there. And so, if you want to be able to survive, you need to look at how to produce food as well as just having food to eat if there's nothing in the grocery store. This is going to be for people of all budgets. Most of the suggestions I'm going to give you can be done on a shoestring budget. So, there's not a lot of money that's going to be involved here. It's more of a way of looking at how you're going to store food and produce food to live through something like a Great Depression, which it looks like that's where we're heading, unfortunately. I'm going to focus on container gardening. I'm going to focus on what kind of food I store that I can also use in the garden. If you have an apartment, if you have a house, or if you have just a room, you can garden. The suggestions I'm giving you here can be done just about anywhere. If you only have an apartment and you don't have a balcony, you can grow a garden in a windowsill or under grow lights. If you have a nice balcony, then you're doing great. You can grow food on your balcony. The suggestions I'm making here are going to be more towards container gardening, which can be done in a windowsill or under grow lights or on a balcony or porch. You can take these tactics and move them into an in the ground garden as well. But right now, I'm going to be talking more about container gardening and a way to start a container food garden on a shoestring budget. You might want to have a pen and paper. You may want to take notes and make lists. Okay, so let's get into my philosophy of survival food and garden.
Food and garden. Now, I will not recommend here for you to go out and get buckets of stored food that will last 20 years. If we are coming into another Great Depression and a worldwide famine, that food's going to be gone in a couple years. So, not only is that stored food expensive, but you're not going to need to store food for that long. I think we're going to need it a lot sooner. So I have some other suggestions. You can do that. Get yourself, the ready-made food and whatever, but this is what I'm doing. For the garden, one of the best investments I have made for my garden is from the Dollar General out here. $10, I got a wood burning tool. And I use this wood burning tool to cut plastic and to make holes in plastic. And with this little $10 doohickey, you can turn anything that is in a food safe plastic into a pot. And it is unbelievable about how many things you can do this with. Okay? I have made pots out of, as you can see, plastic bins, 5-gallon buckets, water bottles. And that's one thing that I have stocked up on is water bottles. You can't store enough water, but you can store a lot of water bottles and fill them up. Okay? I've used little wipes tubs, little Huggies wipes tubs. I've made so many different types of plant pots with with the wood burner. I've made pots out of coffee containers, out of sugar containers. Again, it just needs to be the right type of plastic. And look up your little symbols on the plastic so you know. But if food came in it, you're fine. If it's something that water or something edible has come in, you're fine. These little popcorn cups from the dollar store, I made those into pots. I took water bottles, and I made larger pots like you see. I poke holes in the bottom and then just take some spray paint and spray painted them. I also took an old shoe rack and put holes in the tops and put holes in the bottom, and I used that to grow. So all you need is just a little bit of creativity. I also made some little hydroponic bottles out of some old lemon juice containers and some little plastic Solo shot glasses. Those things actually last a long time. I reuse these little shot glasses for seedlings a lot. And I also have a hanging garden of microgreens that I have made out of old water bottles. And it works beautifully. I'm able to fill the entire wall on my porch. And when it was freezing, I used a shower curtain from the dollar store and kept them all alive. So you don't need much space. You don't need much money. You just need a little bit of creativity and a wood burner, or you could use scissors. You can use a drill, but I prefer the wood burner because that also helps soften the edges. Because if you use scissors, those edges can be sharp enough to cut you. And so here's inside my bus when it was winter. I've got my little sprouting bottles, and I hang them up with little magnet hooks. And I'll go back to this. One thing I found is this is the quickest way to start producing your own food. And sprouts are very, very nutrient dense. So stock up on sprouting seeds, and from the time you put the seeds into the soil and water them, you can have a continual harvest in less than 2 weeks. So having a few of these bottles, seed them, and in about 2 weeks time you can be harvesting at least one salad a day. It's not going to be all that you need, but it'll help with nutrients, and it's something else that will help in your life that you don't have to buy from the store. When I first started my garden a couple years ago, I went out and stocked up on clear shower curtains at the dollar store. Another option would be tablecloths. And I used those to create greenhouses that kept my crops from freezing over the winter. So I actually was able to keep a lot of my crops alive all throughout the winter. And this was the winter of the Texas freeze that we had, where we actually had a foot of snow and it was in the 20s for a week straight. I kept all my plants alive with shower curtains and tablecloths. So there's a lot of things you can do with what you have in your house. Now, most of your preppers will talk to you about saving seeds, which I think is a great idea, of course. But look at all sorts of different varieties. And also look for things that you may not have thought about before. One of my big deals was I wanted to make sure I had a source of caffeine. And if you look over here on the right side, I have seeds for tea and coffee plants, as well as tobacco, woolly lamb's ear, soapwort, and sugar beet. Grow food from the grocery store. If you are on a budget and you're trying to get a garden started, grow what you're eating. It's unbelievable how many things will actually grow from the grocery store. Most people assume that if you plant beans that you get, or if you plant anything from the grocery store, that it's all treated so that it won't grow. That's not true. Some of it is, but definitely not all of it. I'll give you guys some ideas, but I have grown a ton of things from the grocery store. I find it a little ridiculous that, for example, if you bought dried corn to eat, it's very, very cheap. But if you buy corn to sprout or to grow in your garden, it's like 10 times as expensive. So what do? I make sure that the stuff that I buy can be eaten straight up or sprouted or grown to full maturity in the garden. So that's another thing that you ought to consider when you go shopping for beans and rice. Test those beans for germination. And if you can buy dried peas instead of canned peas. Test them for germination. Not only is sprouted food so much denser in nutrients, it's sprouting your food can multiply the nutrients up to 10 times. So I've read. So one thing that you might want to consider stocking up on is grains that sprout. Food and grains that sprout. Dried beans, dried wheat berry, and I would suggest if you store wheat to store the ancient varieties of wheat like einkorn and farro, because our modern varieties of winter and spring wheat have about 3 times as many chromosomes as the ancient varieties do. I don't know about you, but I don't really trust Frankenfood, and they changed our wheat varieties back in the 60s. So even though it might say organic and so on and so forth, I consider it still GMO. So I stock up on ancient varieties of wheat if I'm going to sprout it. I've grown sugarcane. If you see the big piece of sugarcane here, I cut it right below the little nodules there, and I've got 5 or 6 sugarcane babies from that one piece of sugarcane I got at the grocery store. I've grown garlic. Put garlic in water and you can start growing garlic just for the greens or to grow actual garlic. You can also do the same with ginger, turmeric, but you have to grow that in the soil. Look at what would sprout. I've grown bean plants from a cheapy little dollar bag of beans. So it's unbelievable what will sprout. And also sprout anything you can before you cook it. It will amplify the nutrients. It'll also cut down your cooking time. So really look into sprouting whatever you cook before you cook it. And I've also heard that it takes the toot out of the magical fruit if you sprout your beans first. So again, it turns regular beans and regular foods into superfoods. I have bought seeds in bulk from the feed stores. I can use them for sprouting seeds, or I could actually cook them and eat them as a meal, or I can cook them to maturity in the garden. I have also found that a lot of beans will sprout that are just in your plain old dried beans will sprout. So when you go to the store, take a look and do some tests and see what sprouts, and stock up a lot more on things that will sprout than things that don't. And you can have garden stock as well as food stock as well as sprouting stock in the same package. I have grown peanuts from a bag of raw peanuts. It's on the right there, there's sugar cane, and that's what that looks like. Get a hold of some microgreens or some whole grains. Bob's Red Mill is fantastic. I don't make any money from saying this, but I love Bob's Red Mill. Buy food that sprouts. The microgreens that you see here on the left, you'll find these sometimes at the dollar store. You'll find them at the Dollar Generals, and you can also find them in your home and garden stores. It's usually a microgreens mix. But if you look at the varieties, those can be grown to full maturity in your garden. So just because it says microgreens doesn't mean you have to eat them as microgreens. Actually, for $1, you have a wonderful winter garden here or fall garden here. But the microgreens mix contains all these different varieties, and all of these can be grown to full maturity in your garden. And the mild mix especially would make a fantastic winter greens garden. So keep that in mind. Think out of the box. And then, for example, my local meat market has moringa seeds, $2.50, and a lot of those sprouted. And then I love Bob's Red Mill. The ancient varieties of wheat and the amaranth that I got at Bob's Red Mill also sprouts. So not only could I use it as a sprouting superfood, but I could use it as seed stock to grow these things to full maturity in my garden. So you need to start thinking out of the box, folks, if you really want to save money. Because a lot of times there really is no difference with these things between what you buy for the garden and what you buy to eat, except for price. Local feed stores are a fantastic place to buy bulk seeds. You can use these seeds as sprouting seeds, you can use them in your garden, or you could eat an entire bag for dinner if you have to. So again, you don't have to stick with the label. Think out of the box. These are herbs that I grew from herbs that I bought in the grocery store. If you get herbs from the produce section that are live, a lot of them are cuttings, and you just trim off the extra leaves and put them in soil or put them in water. Over here on the left, that's lemongrass. I bought one little package of lemongrass, and it's about 4 times the size right now outside. So it grew very, very well. Sage I had a harder time with, but mints, basils, things like that grow so easily from cuttings. So a $2 package of mint that I purchased at the H-E-B here in Texas, I was able to get 10 mint plants out of. So again, think out of the box. You would not believe how many things you can grow from the produce section or the farmer's market. Of course, organic would be better to use, but you could still use whatever you come across. You can grow the tops. On the right hand side here is a pineapple that I'm growing from the top of a pineapple. Over here on the left, that's ginger that I grew from a piece of ginger I got at the store. And by the way, on the right here, this is a pot that I made out of a cat litter container, which is made out of food safe plastic. So I put holes in the bottom of it, and I cut a huge hole in the top, and it makes a nice little pot. Any citrus that I get, I plant the seeds from. Right now I have over 2 dozen citrus tree seedlings, and it takes them a while. I'm gonna have to be patient because it's gonna be 3 or more years before I'll get fruit from these guys. But I've got grapefruit and tangerines and mandarin oranges and regular oranges and lemon and all sorts of things. So if you're patient, you could actually have an orchard within a few years just from planting the seeds from the produce you buy in the store. When I had a decent amount of money to spend on my food preps, I bought sprouting seeds. And not only can you eat them straight up, if I was desperate, I could use a bag of that to make some lentil soup, but eat them as sprouts, but I could also use them as seed stock for my garden. So if you're going to stock up on beans and rice and things like that, I strongly suggest you look for sprouting seeds. But also test the stuff that you get, like dried beans in the grocery store, and see what sprouts. And if something sprouts, get a bunch of that. Again, Bob's Red Mill is fantastic. And these are some ancient varieties of grains that I bought, and most of them will sprout. So you can eat, like for instance, the wheat berries here, sprout them until they have just an itty bitty tail, and then eat them for breakfast. They taste really good. They're very sweet. I'll eat them straight out of the water. But sprout your food, and you will turn just about any regular food into a superfood. But I could also, if I had to, use these things to make wheatgrass, or I could use them as seed stock for the garden. And here's some other ones. So take a look at what you have in your grocery store. See what would sprout and what doesn't. And consider only stocking up on things that sprout, so that way you can have multiple uses and also just greatly multiply the nutrients of the food you're eating. If you are able to have a garden, I strongly recommend companion planting. Now, each variety of plant has different plants that it likes and it doesn't like. So you need to do a little bit of research, but I'll throw out a couple combinations of what I do in my garden for you to give you ideas. First off, I came out one day and my poor lemon tree had huge chunks taken out of every leaf on the tree. One grasshopper did this. Just one. So I planted basil into the same pot, and I never had a problem with grasshoppers again. That poor tree has taken so much abuse. But I got 5 good lemons off of it last year. Another good combination is basil and tomatoes. And as a matter of fact, I grow basil in every pot of tomatoes. Many years ago, I had 2 decent sized tomato plants in containers. And I came home from work one day and every leaf was off of both of those plants. And there were little bitty little piles of green poop everywhere. It was disgusting. And 2 of the largest worms I've ever seen in my life were one on each plant. It just took one worm to completely defoliate an entire tomato plant in less than 1 day. They were called tomato hornworms. Well, what I found is that if you grow basil in the same pot as tomato, not only do they help each other grow, they help each other taste better, and you cook them together, but the basil will keep the tomato hornworms off your tomato plants. I have never seen a tomato hornworm after I started planting basil in with my tomatoes. Another thing I've got in the same pot is, I think that's garlic right there. But garlic, onions, different things like that. So again, look up each plant and what its best companions are, and that way you can save on space, but it'll also help the plants and help keep the pests at bay. Trust me, it works. Some folks live in homes that have homeowners associations that won't let you get away with growing crops in your front yard, or you might live in the city where you don't necessarily want to make yourself a target by growing obvious crops. So I'd like to throw a couple ideas out for you of crops that you can grow that are covert. They're not obvious, not a lot of people know about them, and you may not realize that these things are edible. And amaranth is a huge one. Amaranth used to be a mainstay of a lot of South American tribal communities and cultures, and it was outlawed by the conquistadors, basically to starve them out, because starvation is a very popular weapon of genocide. And amaranth went by the wayside at that point. But amaranth can supply up to 70% of the nutrients that humans need. You can eat the greens, you can cook the larger greens as spinach, you can put the young greens in salads, and then when it gets large enough, you have little bitty grains that you can grind and you can cook and you can eat. So amaranth is extremely overlooked, and it is a superfood, and it's something that should come back because it's also non-GMO, and it doesn't look like a crop. And one of the common varieties of amaranth that people grow just because of how it looks is Love Lies Bleeding is the name of it. But it is a type of amaranth, and you can eat the grain, you can eat the leaves. So that's a very overlooked crop that should make a comeback, especially with what's going on in the world. Another one, if you're in a warm climate, is moringa. Moringa is like growing a multivitamin. It is one of the most important crops that I grow in my garden. Besides having the carbs and the starches and things just to keep you running, you need nutrients. So if all you're eating is pasta, you may not get the nutrients, and you might end up getting sick because you're lacking nutrients. Moringa is one of the most incredible plants or trees. It's a little tree that you can grow. The thing is, it is for tropical climates. So what'll happen is, if you grow moringa in the summer, once it starts getting to about 60 degrees at night, it's going to go into dormancy. So you're going to want to cover it up, make sure it doesn't freeze, and put it away somewhere, and make sure you keep it watered, and it'll come back in the spring. But if you're in a tropical climate, moringa is a fantastic plant to grow, and it's called the tree of life. It's also called the miracle tree. It creates these little pods that you see. The seeds can actually be used to help purify water, believe it or not. And the seeds, you can extract oil, cooking oil from the seeds. So it could be a source of cooking oil that you can grow in your home or in your garden. You can eat the leaves, you can dry them as powder, you can drink them as tea. Uh, so moringa is an extremely powerful plant, and it's unbelievably precious for nutrients. And it's actually used in third world countries to help people with malnutrition, because when they get to a certain point of starvation, their body doesn't want to absorb nutrients anymore, and moringa helps with that. So if you're in a warm climate, strongly consider growing moringa in the summers. Dandelion, I've mentioned before. If you can't afford gardening supplies, if you can't afford anything like that, you could grow dandelions. You can eat them. The roots can be used as a coffee substitute. It also helps with diabetes. So that is an emergency starvation food, and it's actually a good food to eat now to add to your diet. But you don't want to grab dandelions from somebody's yard that uses chemical fertilizers and pesticides and things like that. But go out and scrounge you up some dandelion seeds and scrounge you up some clean dirt, and you could grow dandelion. Dandelion is actually very talented at growing in bad soils. It will help loosen up compacted soils. So if you can't have a garden, you can't do anything like that, look for dandelions. It's unbelievable how healthy and how good for you they are, and how easy it is.
Well, thank you for your time, and I hope I've given you some good ideas and some hope and some things that you can work on to help you and your family survive what's coming. I hope you guys take care. Godspeed. And y'all come back now, you hear? Bye.
Sprouting your food